as they like to. And if that doesn't work, we can
I agree.
switch
There's
over
only
to
20 people, so we'll just be polite and keep ourselves muted until we have something to say, and then you kind of raise your hand and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And-
I'm Amy Ty. Oh, sorry. I'm Amy Ty, and I've been coming to these conferences for a couple of years. And I'm really wondering what the nexus is for how do you take what you both know and practice. Is the next step to do this in this country, to introduce green manure crops here, to introduce the kind of technology that you're doing, Florence?
Mhm.
Or is it to continue to go work in other countries outside of the US?
Well, I mean, I think humanity needs all of that. As for Sustainable Harvest International, we are still a relatively small organization with pretty limited resources and limited capacity. So we're trying to think strategically about what can we best contribute to this broader movement. And there are other organizations that are promoting cover crops and green manures and other regenerative practices here in the US. We wish them all the success possible in doing that. We might eventually consider expanding our work into Africa or Asia, but until we're ready to do that, it makes me feel a lot better knowing that Roland and others are there moving this kind of work forward there. As far as Sustainable Harvest International goes, as I mentioned, we're early on in working out our plan for scaling up. And in scaling up, we're thinking about what seems to make sense is how we can remain a relatively small international development organization, which is likely what we will always be, but leverage our experience these last 23 years to have the biggest global impact possible. And the way it seems that we're most likely to be able to do that is by finding other institutions to replicate the model that we've developed over the years, or variations on that model, and also to continue innovating within our model so that what we are offering to others to replicate, we hope will continue to become more effective and more efficient. So we've worked with cover crops in the past. We were lucky enough to have Roland visit some of our farms in Belize, and so now we're working on improving what we've done with cover crops, and as well as other aspects of the program. And yeah, I think I mentioned we started to talk to some government ministries, and we're hopeful that we will eventually find some that will take on our model and replicate it out through their countries. We'll probably start looking in Central America because that's what we know, and that's where our best contacts are. But then we will expand out from there, and if opportunities arise in other parts of the world, probably staying focused on the global south, then we would look to expand out from there. And we do hope that we can help to set the example and help lead the way towards a paradigm shift for agriculture around the world, but trying not to spread ourselves too thin, and trying to stick to our knitting, as one of my board members likes to say.
I'm wondering whether both of you, am I hearing correctly from both of you that in your experience, which is now quite long, the place to start is with the individual small farmers? And that is partly because, I'm asking, partly because dealing with governments is so difficult and unsuccessful?
Well, I would like to first of all finish answering the last question, and that is that
Sorry.
those of you who are working in the United States and with farmers, or you are farmers or something, the person who's become basically the leader of the entire green cover crop movement in the States, and it's growing very, very fast by leaps and bounds, is a fellow by the name of Gabe Brown, G-A-B-E-B-R-O-W-N. He's a farmer in North Dakota, of all places, using some of the technologies we use in the tropics, but he's having a tremendous impact. He speaks at all sorts of conferences. If you go on the internet, you'll find dozens of his videos on different aspects of green manuring, and that would be the way to start. He really is the leader of the whole green manure movement in the United States, or I should say cover crops. That's what they call them. Now, what was your question you just asked? I'll give a little bit on that too.
The value of working at the farmer level versus working at the government level.
Well, at least in Africa, governments aren't going to even look at something unless you've proven it on a large scale among farmers. I mean, Tony Ronaldo with his FMNR movement, which is a type of green manure using trees, didn't start getting any attention from governments until he could prove from satellite photos that he had over 10 million hectares of FMNR in half a dozen countries. Then all of a sudden, all the governments all over Africa wanted to jump on the bandwagon, and it's now expanded. I mean, he now I believe he has something like 24. He has evidence from satellite photos of over 24 million hectares of which would be what, 60 million or 70 million acres of trees that have been planted on land that used to be pretty much barren. And actually, I shouldn't say planted. What he does is they regenerate them. They don't actually plant them, because in most droughty areas, planted trees just don't have the root systems to survive. But if you have old root systems that have been there for 40 and 50 years, that farmers have been burning and cutting and burying and all that sort of thing to get rid of them, they stay alive under the soil in these droughty areas for generations. And so what he gets farmers to do is revive those. But basically,
Roland, what was his last name?
Start with smallholder farmers. That's absolutely the first way to go. And frankly, when smallholder farmers really like a technology, they will spread it so fast it will make you will be absolutely amazed. I mean, I'm working in a program right now in Malawi, and I sent to Adam a report on my last visit there, where just in this last year, on a program that has a total budget of $4,000, the farmers, largely through their own initiative and teaching each other and so forth, have planted in their fields over 20,000 trees. So I mean, how much is that per tree? A few pennies. But no, the farmers in Africa realize that with these droughts getting worse all the time, they're going to be out of business within 10 years. I mean, they either ship out to the slums, or they try to find some way to get to Europe, or they die. I mean, their farms are just becoming so unproductive that there's no hope for the future. And when they realize these green manure cover crops can turn things around, it's amazing what they do, not only to adopt it themselves, but to teach it to others.
Roland, could you say the name of that person, Tony?
The FMNR, the leader of the FMNR movement?
Yeah.
Yes, his name is Tony Ronaldo, Rinaudo, and he'll also be all over the internet. He's Australian and works with World Vision Australia.
FMNR. Okay, thank you.
What does FMNR stand for?
Farmer managed natural regeneration.
Thank you.
Of trees.
Thank you.
And regarding that question about working with at the farmer level versus working at the government level, and historically, Sustainable Harvest International has worked at the farmer level because we didn't see a way forward or enough of a level of interest at the government level in what we were doing. Now, in recent years, I've seen that starting to shift, and so I think there are opportunities now, and they might still be few and far between, but it seems that governments are now taking an interest. They've pretty much all signed on to the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, to the Paris Accord, and a program like Sustainable Harvests or like Roland's work or other organizations doing this type of work can show how one single program can help a government reach their goals for climate, for hunger, for poverty, for land degradation, for water protection, and so on. We've been talking with Hans Herren at the Millennium Institute as part of our work towards scaling up our impact and looking into whether we can work with them. They have a platform that they've developed. I'm going to try to do a share screen here. I think you'll be able to see it. So that they've developed this modeling platform called ISDG, like iPhone, but for the Sustainable Development Goals. And they work with governments to adapt it to each country. And then it's a modeling system where the governments can put in different scenarios and see what impact those different scenarios will have on reaching their goals for the 17 sustainable, or their targets for the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And Millennium Institute has a particular interest in agroecology. So they cover everything with this modeling, but they encourage the governments to look at agroecology and then to see what impacts investing in agroecology can have versus in business as usual. So I think this is for the maybe first 4 or 5 countries where they've done this, where they found that investing in business as usual agriculture could get these governments 26% of the way to their Sustainable Development Goal targets, but investing in agroecology could get them 34% of the way to those Sustainable Development Goal targets. And then one could argue that it comes with a lot of other benefits as well. So working with institutions like Millennium Institute as an intermediary, I feel like will give us still more opportunities to influence governments and roll out the type of program that we've been doing for the past 23 years at a national level. And if we can show success in one country, then I think it becomes that much easier to roll it out to additional countries as well. Just the way if it works for one farmer and other farmers is going to want to replicate that success, I think the same can be true for governments.
Mhm.
And of course, another thing that can help us in that whole process of getting governments involved is that the second, after Tony's work, what I consider the second best work in regenerative agriculture in the developing world is that of Brazil, where they've got over 2 million farmers using green manure cover crops and conservation agriculture on about 25 million hectares. And that entire program is run by the government. I mean, it's been a government program right from the start. There was never an NGO really heavily involved in it. And boy, it wouldn't take long for a couple of people like Alimir Calagati or Salgado de Freitas to convince government people in other countries that they ought to get on, that they ought to get going and do this, because they have made tremendous strides. The agricultural productivity in Brazil is actually going up as a nation, and the amount of chemical fertilizer used per hectare is going down at the same time. And,
Roland, how has that been that program? How has that been affected by this new guy they have in there? I can't remember his name.
Bolsonaro?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure he doesn't care about it at all. But the interesting thing is, see, Brazil has one of the only really functioning federal systems in Latin America. The states, probably Mexico would be the only other case. The states actually have a lot of influence and have their own agricultural programs and so forth. And this program, like I say, that's got 2 million farmers working on 25 million hectares using these technologies. And they have some farmers where you've got over 100,000 hectares where one farmer is using green manures. But anyway, that program is run by two of the states of Santa Catarina and the state of Paraná in southern Brazil. They're the ones that got that whole program going, and they've gotten other states interested in it. But it's not the national government, it's the state governments that have headed this thing up.
I think the upshot of it is that it's much easier to sell to the farmers, because the farmers have so much to gain and so little to lose, and they have control over their farms. And so it's much easier to go right to the farmers, but the amount of resources it takes to reach the farmers, it would just, for a small organization like ours, we could never significantly increase our impact that way. And so we've come to the point where we feel like it's worth investing some time in trying to deal with all the bureaucracy and all the competing interests and everything else within the governments in order to have that much broader reach.
Of course, there's some very large NGOs that also can have a major impact. Like, for instance, Catholic Relief Services in Central America is promoting green manures, and they've had quite a large amount of impact in Nicaragua and El Salvador, for instance. So, you know, that is another, and usually they tend to be much more efficient than the government extension programs.
Flo, you've mentioned your group is kind of small. Give us a sense. How big is your group? How are you looking to grow? What's the skill set of your people, and how do you see your group going over time?
Okay, so Sustainable Harvest, we have 4 people on our headquarters staff, and it's a remote office, so we spent a lot of time on Zoom. And then the 4 headquarters staff support 3 country programs in Honduras, Panama, and Belize. We have an office in each of those countries. We have a country director in each country, and then most of our staff are the local field trainers who work every day with the farmers. We have about 25 Central Americans that are supported in the program work by the 4 people at the headquarters. So going forward, we would like to double the number of farmers that work directly with us, or double the number of field trainers that we have in our program, so that we have a broader sample set to use for making our case with partners, for the inherent value of the work, of course, as well, and also to have more opportunities to test some changes in the methodology to see if we can make it more effective and more efficient, but compare it to what we've been doing, which has proven quite effective already. And so going forward, in addition to wanting to increase the number of field trainers working with farmers, a couple of other areas that we want to add to it is our capacity for documenting our methodology and create a curriculum around it to train other organizations in using our methodology. And so we'd like to add some capacity there, either with a staff person or a consultant who can help us with that piece of it. And then the same for testing some of these ideas we have for changes to the methodology. And one of which we want to look into opportunities for earned income to see whether we could do something such as aggregating crops from the thousands of farmers in our program or graduated from the program, sell them to benefit the farmers, but also to earn income to offset the costs of the technical assistance, so that it makes it that much easier to spread. Or on the flip side, maybe selling some tools or appropriate products, not agrochemicals or anything like that, obviously, to the farmers. So again, generating some income to offset the costs. And so those are a few of the areas where we're looking at growing going forward, and always trying to improve our fundraising abilities as well, since of course that is, that allows us to do all these other things that we'd like to do.
Okay, I see. I assume that all the training is on site, and do you anticipate opportunities where you might be able to do, multiple farmers together? How would you see that
The,
going?
the way we have been doing the training is our field trainer for a community who's usually working with about 30 families will do periodic workshops and invite all of the 30 families that are in the program, and invite anybody else in the community and surrounding area who wants to participate. And then that's followed up by individual farm site visits. When we start in the program, I mean, first it's just selecting the families that are truly interested, explaining that what we offer is mostly technical assistance, that we don't really offer handouts, except maybe sometimes some seeds or a few things to help get started, and then getting the families that are truly interested involved. And then the field trainer works with each family for a plan for their land. So each family literally draws a picture of what their land looks like, what their house looks like, and then what they want it to look like 5 years out or further out. And then together, the trainer and the family work side by side during the coming years to reach those goals and make that picture that the farmer and the farmer's family have drawn into reality on their land. And I've gotten talking and I've forgotten what the question was. Did I ever get around to answering it?
No, you did. It was the on-site
Right,
training
yes.
and off-site training. You exactly nailed it. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, then our field trainers are out there getting their hands in the dirt with the farmers most days.
Can I just follow?
We're looking at technology too. As more farmers do get access to things like cell phones, and right now our staff are not allowed to go out to the communities. So all 3 of our programs are paused to a great extent, but there is a certain amount of communication happening by cell phone. Pictures are being sent, in some cases videos, as you saw at the presentation this morning. And other organizations have been doing a lot of pioneering work for a while, and this idea of using cell phones and that type of technology more effectively. One of the partnerships we're looking at as part of the scaling up process is with the Grameen Foundation, and they work with a variety of things that we would like to try out, including the mobile technology, including an earned income component. Unfortunately, a lot of it's based in agrochemicals, so we want to see if we can join forces so that we could help them get away from the agrochemicals and instead offer the technical assistance for these ecological approaches, and that they could help us with some of these areas that we'd like to explore and strengthen on our end. So, yeah.
I wonder if I could follow up just to the same question. What's the model that seems to work for you with regard to how this program propagates? In other words, is it sort of teach one, they teach somebody else, then they teach other people? Is it that way? In other words, you got 5 people to start, and then you got 10, and then you got 20. And I mean, how does this in practice work out in terms of how it spreads?
Well, I know Roland has more information on that with his program. With ours, we want to do a study to get a better handle on that. As I think I mentioned before, we have found that after families graduate from our program, 91% of them keep using the practices they've learned. We see it's being passed down to younger generations. We even some of the trainers we hire now are the children of people who have graduated from our program. And then anecdotally, we hear about farmers coming and visiting the farms who have graduated from the program, wanting to learn how the farmers that graduated, how they're doing what they're doing, and our graduate farmers sharing with other people. The one small study that was done found that each farmer was training an average of 7 more farmers, but that wasn't a really solid study. We don't feel like we could really hang our hats on that. We need to do a broader, more in-depth study. So we do want to get a handle on that. And varying opinions within the organization about how much that's happening. How much farmers are able to travel from one farm to another. They're very busy on their own farms. So we're not entirely sure. So we want to get a good handle on that. And then based on that, if it seems like adding a little extra support, we can leverage that so that the farmers are doing a lot more to share what they've learned with other farmers, that we want to invest in that as a way of better spreading the practices that we teach. And I think, Roland, you've had some impressive ripple effects in your work in Africa, right?
Yeah, I sent Adam a report that I did on my last visit to Malawi, working with Glura City there, and I guess he will make it available to everybody so you can read it if you want. I also sent, by the way, a series of case studies that I did several years ago. There's 10 case studies. It's a little longer than I like, about 25 pages, but you can pick the case studies you want to read. But anyway, these case studies tell about different groups of people and different organizations that are doing regenerative agriculture, including the two I just mentioned, Tony Ronaldo's work in Africa and the work in southern Brazil. But the case studies describe the work of about work that's reaching something on the order of 6 or 7 million farmers, and then describes several other programs that are interesting because of what they teach about regenerative agriculture and what can be done. But basically what we're doing in Africa right now is trying to develop a system whereby you have about, well, we started with 50 lead farmers because there had been a previous program there in the past. We're sort of picking up the pieces. Those 50 farmers have now trained, each of them has trained about 10 or 15 others. And we hope to be able to go on like that, reaching hopefully in a few years, maybe 100,000 or 200,000 farmers. So having started from basically scratch in terms of what our organization is doing. Now, so we're looking at, because we want to scale up. The whole reason for our program is it's basically not a development program as much as it is a disaster prevention program. I mean, the figures that people are coming up with recently as to what COVID might do in terms of hunger in Africa are accurate. I mean, there could be 100 million farmers or people dying of starvation within the next 2 or 3 years in Africa. I mean, it's a very, very serious situation. We've been following it for 10 years, and it's gotten worse very, very quickly, as I said earlier. So we're basically trying to scale up just absolutely as fast as we can. And I think, Florence, I just wanted to mention to you, really, that maybe one source of funds, I mean, what we're looking at, what we're going to try and do is prove this next 2 or 3 years how cheaply we can get tons and tons of carbon into the soil. Because we have a lot of evidence to show that farmers can put into the soil long-term, not just short-term carbon, but long-term carbon, a total of about 5 tons to 6 tons per hectare per year. And that carbon should stay there for, 40 or 50 years, at least. So what we're going to try and prove by satellite photos, just like Tony did, we're going to try and prove in the next 3 or 4 years that we can sequester in the soil more carbon more cheaply than any other group in the world, using whatever technology you want to talk about. And we feel that if we can do that, there will be millions and millions of dollars, mostly from European environmentalists, who are, as we speak, putting together billions of dollars to try and slow down reduce the amount of carbon in the world's, going into the world's atmosphere. So, you might look into that too. I mean, I think if we can get the evidence on, in satellite photos of what we're talking about, and they can now measure carbon in the soil, at least in the top little bit of the soil, because of certain chemical emissions that come off of that and so forth. And they can also tell very easily how much organic matter is going into the soil, because they can see the crops and the trees. And you know, if we can prove to them that by far the best, most efficient way to use their money, these billions of dollars they're hoping to put together, is by working with good programs using green manure cover crops. You know, our problem will not be getting enough money. It will be our problem will be using the money we get as efficiently as possible, and probably we're going to have to turn down money, you know, in order to maintain our level of efficiency. But I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of money. Well, people say there's going to be a tremendous amount of money dedicated to you know, reaching the Paris Accords by the year 2100. I believe it would be simple. If we just could get the money, I believe it would be quite simple to do. And we're going to pretty soon have the evidence in satellite photos that in fact that's the case.
Florence,
Yes.
91% that continue your program afterwards is a pretty respectable number.
Mm-hmm.
Have you put any effort into figuring out why those 9% didn't?
I've read the surveys, and you know, I remember that, you know, in some cases somebody died, unfortunately, and there wasn't necessarily next generation there to carry it on. I think in another case there was an emergency, and quick money was needed, and so they had gone to the city to look for work to get the cash more quickly than they would have continuing to build out the farm. Those are the ones that I remember.
It seems important I mean, those examples sound, you know, that's what happened.
Yeah.
But I just think that the understanding the reasons that this doesn't continue is important in terms of your growth and future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if it's those sorts of reasons, then, you know, you can't really fight about it. But if there's something else in there, it may be worth looking at in terms of what could we have done differently, or what else could we have done, or whatever.
Right. We've done some other types of follow-up studies with graduates. We did one called Ripple Effect Mapping, where we got together farmers who had graduated from the program and some of their neighbors who had not been in the program, and they interviewed each other. And it was open-ended questions, and so it let us paint a broader picture of what happened while we were there and since we were there. And the area where we found that our results had been lacking from the perspective of the people in the program was in building up the business side of their farms. So they could use more help in connecting with good markets and adding value to the crops. So that's an area where we know that we could be doing more, and it would, I think, then produce better results for the farmers. And it's, again, part of what we want to look at going forward as part of these scaling up plans, testing out maybe a different way of working with the farmers beyond the core technical assistance to help them and us through some business, either doing it ourselves or ideally with a partner. So for instance, we've been talking recently with a small business in Costa Rica called the Jungle Project, and they're promoting agroforestry systems and basing it to begin with, to keep it simple, on one product, which is breadfruit, which they're making into flour. And they are a business, but they're finding it's hard to provide all the technical assistance to support the business without a charitable component. They were looking at setting one up, but now they're talking to us about, could we provide the charitable technical assistance component that would feed into their business, and then some of the profit from their business could come back to offset the charitable dollars needed for our technical assistance component. So that's the kind of thing that we're thinking about and looking for.
Florence, the video showed some small livestock chickens. And I'm wondering, in general, could you discuss a little further how you teach them about integrating livestock into the agricultural scenario?
We don't do a lot with livestock, but the families that work with us, usually when they join the program, they already have some yard chickens. And we just work with them to help them better manage the yard chickens, essentially. So usually there's no safe place for the chickens to roost at night. They roost in the trees, and predators get them. They lay their eggs wherever they happen to be when the mood strikes them. And so then predators also get the eggs. So one of the things we do is help the families build simple chicken coops where the chickens can roost at night. They still free range during the day, but by having a safe place to roost at night and a safe place to lay their eggs, it means that more of the chickens survive. The family has more meat from the chickens. They have a safe place to lay their eggs. The families get more eggs to eat or to produce more chickens. The manure that collects underneath, of course, can be used as part of building up the soils. So we do that. We do some simple fish ponds. And then the water from the fish ponds, usually either it's a Rice-Piscicultura system where the fish and the are in together with rice, and then the fish eat the weeds, and the manure from the fish fertilizes the rice, or it goes from the fish pond to the rice paddy, and then from there off and on to vegetable crops or something else. So those all work together really nicely. In some cases, in addition to yard chickens, people are interested in having yard iguanas. Iguanas are very popular meat in the countries where we work, and I guess because of that, they're endangered in the wild. So instead of having the people continue to kill the remaining wild iguanas, we're helping them start to raise yard iguanas similar to how they would raise the yard chickens, and show them how to create a safe place for the iguanas to lay their eggs, how to protect those eggs, how to handle the baby iguanas and familiarize them with the humans, and then set up a place where they can have sort of an iguana coop to go into, but then also go out into the trees and put the food out for them in the trees, and then the families eat some the meat and the eggs from some of the iguanas while allowing others to continue reproducing like the chickens. And some of our families also have goats, a similar system, and that's about all we've done with animals. The areas where we work, we don't feel are really appropriate for cattle. So yeah, that's oh, and worm composting, if you count that. There's worms. I don't know if they count as livestock, but
Thank you.
Oh, and something new that our PANAW program at least has started. So soldier fly larvae, I think it is, that they're starting to produce as a feed for the chickens and a feed for the fish. I'd have to check back on that, but something along those lines.
You mentioned this morning about a target of $250 per farm. Give us a sense, what are the highest priority items? Where does that money use most effectively?
Well, our program is all about technical assistance. So right now it costs us about $6,500 to take a family through our entire 5-year program. And most of that cost is the salary and benefits and so on for the trainer, the transportation to get the trainer out to the communities, and then smaller amounts for some materials and some of the sort of back end support for the work of the trainers. And the way we'd like to look at bringing that cost down, our sort of initial ideas are going from 5 years to 3 years for the core part of the program, with anything that follows being at least self-funding, if not income generating. And then another piece is that income generation piece that we hope we can build in, which it wouldn't bring down the cost of providing the technical assistance, but it would offset it. So it would bring down the amount of charitable dollars or government funding, if it was a government program, that would have to be invested in the technical assistance. And then the other idea is this idea of using farmer mentors, so that if we're paying one agronomist and maybe a small stipend for a set of farmer mentors working with that agronomist, we get that much further for each dollar we invest. And then there would be a certain amount of economies of scale. For our smallest program in Belize, we have an office and a country director and an administrator supporting 3 field trainers. And with that same office and support staff, it could be 30, or maybe one more support staff. It could be 30 instead of 3. So there would be a certain amount of economies of scale also.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Well, since nobody has a question, I'll mention that actually what we've looked at more than the percentage of farmers that we've trained staying with the technology, we look at how many other farmers each of those farmers trains. In other words, we expect in our program in Africa, at least, that for each farmer that we've trained, there will be 10 farmers who will be using the technology within 2 years. Now, some of the farmers won't teach anybody else, and other farmers will teach 20 or 30 other people. You know, this is an average. You can't count on everybody doing it. But the enthusiasm of the people is such, because the technology is so simple and so effective, and they, like I said, they know that their whole way of life is going down the drain if they don't do something. You know, we're finding that actually 10 is a conservative number. I mean, this last couple of years in Malawi, the number's been close to 20 per farmer. And that means, you know, if you have 5% or 10% or 15% of the people fall out of the program, it doesn't really, that isn't nearly as important as whether we can have each farmer training an average of 10 or 20 other farmers as just a volunteer effort on their part because they believe in what they're doing.
That's the viral figure I was looking for. It seemed like it would be built into this. The multiplication of the impact.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. I had one of the most interesting years in my whole life. I was commissioned by the organization I worked with to go around and study scaling up. So I talked to the leaders of the best cases of scaling up in the whole world. One of those was the Brazilian movement I already mentioned. And since I've gotten to know them a lot better, but also that one of them was a very interesting fellow, Dr. Kurian in India, who started out working when he was young with a co-op of about 100 women who were marketing milk. By the time I met him, he'd set up what was called the National Dairy Development Board, which still exists. He's died, and they were marketing. When I talked with him about 10 years ago, they were marketing 40% of all the both cow and buffalo milk that were being marketed in the entire country of India. Now that's serious scaling up. So I mean, you know, but I got to talk with people like that in about 10 different countries. You know, I just picked the people who had the most successful cases of scaling up. They were all NGOs. They were all non-governmental organizations, and I went around and talked with them and tried to learn from what they were doing. It was a tremendous experience.
What I can't help thinking of is this all maybe seeming like these numbers, even large as they are, maybe a drop in the bucket from some point of view. You have to stop and wonder what would have happened if you hadn't done this. In other words, if these numbers hadn't been doing this work every day, small as they are in relationship to the big numbers, if they hadn't been doing them, where would we be now?
Well, there are a lot of countries that would, you know, where people would be starving to death.
Yeah,
you know.
That's what I'm thinking.
And we wouldn't have the foundation to build a
That's
broader.
right. We'd be starting from
Exactly.
scratch. There'd be
I think there's another metric that sort of says if we don't take action now, even if we take a small action now, it will be much more beneficial than if we waited 10 years and took a big action.
Yep.
And that's another way, for me, that's the pointer I use. It's like even something smaller now will matter much more than waiting to do something big.
A
It's
dollar
highly
spent
successful,
now.
yes.
Yeah, that's
Well,
a savings account principle.
Yeah.
Well,
They
It's
say
called
that the best.
it's called investment.
I actually think it's more about, Howard, I think it's more about cascading effects. It's not,
Yeah,
I hear what
well,
you're
that's true.
saying, but I believe if we take actions now that then can trigger other things, we have a cascading
Sure.
effect in places we don't even see. So it's a different, I'd
Mhm.
say something different.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like
Yeah.
to ask about the farmers in Africa, like you train one and then they train 10 others. Have you also looked at then those 10 others? Do they go on to train a second tier?
Well, usually that requires some more work on the part of the program. But yes, what we're doing right now well, it'll depend on what happens with coronavirus. But what we're doing is looking at the farmers who have been trained, picking the best of those, not all of them, because you're wasting your time on some of them. But picking the best of them, and then you give them a small amount of training, and then they will train other people. And what we do more than anything is we figure that the best way for a farmer to train others is to show them what they've already done. So we wait a little bit, we wait a year before we start working with the second generation of farmers, so that they already have a really, really nice, I mean, they can show farmers that they're producing 3 times what the rest of the farmers are producing. And that's what really makes it possible for them to successfully teach other people. So it's a matter of demonstrating, having small farmers demonstrating to other small farmers what is possible, and then the other farmers get excited and do it.
Roland, how does that happen? Do the new farmers walk to the farms of the farmers that are already successful and learn from them on their farms, or do the successful farmers go to the new farmers? How does that?
Yeah, it will depend on the particular farmers, but usually what happens is, I think the most successful way for farmers to handle it is, okay, a farmer was taught by another farmer, he or she tries it out, and a lot of these are women, frankly. I mean, we shouldn't always use the masculine
Especially in
pronoun.
Africa, I suppose.
Well, yeah, especially in Africa, but even in Latin America. I mean, the thing is, these green manures really provide more positive impact for women than for men, because, for instance, if they're controlling the weeds, it's the women in Africa who have to get out there and weed the food crops. And I mean, women are just thrilled. and furthermore, if you look at the seasons and so forth, the second weeding of maize, which is a huge job, is done precisely in the middle of the hunger season, which means a lot of these women are out there doing the hardest work they do all year long for 3 or 4 or 5 months, and they haven't even had breakfast. I mean, it's so the women the women really are more excited about this stuff than the men are, by and large. And also the women, worry more about having enough food to feed their kids. And so, they really are, but anyway, that's a very important
So you said
thing.
it's most successful that when other farmers just voluntarily seek out the successful farmers and learn from them on a successful farm?
Well, usually what happens is one of the, let's pick a farmer who's already been taught by another farmer. In a year or two, that farmer will be harvesting 2 or 3 times what his neighbors are.
Mm-hmm.
And then his neighbors get excited, and even people from other villages, and they will come to his farm.
Okay.
And often on an informal basis, although once in a while the farmer may just, call everybody at once and have them all come at once so they can teach and they will actually do the training right out in the field. Because if farmers, so farmers can actually see what's happened and why it's working, and they can pick up the soil, and my gosh, this soil is soft. No wonder you don't have to plow anymore, and things like that, So, yeah, that's usually the way it works. And then the other farmers get started, and then we will find out who the best of the other farmers are, who are the ones that are using the technology the best and so forth, and also the ones that are geographically spaced so that they have a lot of new farmers that haven't seen this stuff. They're at the edges of the program,
Mm-hmm.
rather than being in the center where they'd have to go, 25 or 30 kilometers to reach a farmer that hasn't seen it already.
Right.
And, So that's the way it works, more or less.
I'd like to pivot to a new question, if I could.
Go to it.
How do you see the work that both of you do having beneficial effects for being able to adjust to temperature? Sorry, to temperature and weather conditions with global warming. I mean, there's some parts of the world that are going to be too hot to just live in, but we'll leave them aside. Because I don't think either of you is working in the Middle East, for example, but parts of India where we lived certainly could end up there. But so how do you see it coping with increased violent storms or increased heat?
We're already seeing that. The farmers are already in the communities where we work in Central America, seeing changes in the weather patterns, much more unpredictable when the rains will come, when it will be dry, and many aspects of the practices that we teach them help with that. I mean, the big one, just which I'm sure Roland will attest to for his program as well, is building up the organic material in the soil. Just allows the soil to absorb so much more moisture and keep that moisture, so that flooding is less of an issue, so that the moisture is there longer when you get into the dry season. Since we also do a lot with incorporating trees, when the rains do come, they don't hit the ground and compact it and run off over the top of the ground. The trees break the fall of the rainwater, so it reaches the ground much more gently and is better able to then penetrate down into the soils, eventually get down to the aquifers, replenish the aquifers, and provide more steady supply of water throughout the year. Not to mention the fact that, of course, the shade from the trees helps create a better microclimate on the farms. And then the fact that we're increasing the biodiversity, and the farmers, when they enter our program, might be growing 3 or 4 crops, but when they graduate, they're growing 20, 30, or 40 different crops. So even if these other factors might not allow certain crops to get through a drought, or particularly rain at an unexpected time or something, there will be other crops that will get through, particularly the tree crops that can usually withstand these changes better. So all of that adds to the resilience of the farms.
So you can make a strong resilience argument.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. In fact, the Gliricidia, that's one of the reasons we're working with it, is because you prune it each year, and as like you said, like Florence said, the temperature under those trees is something we can control by how many branches we cut off the tree. So as global warming heats up the environment, we just cut fewer branches off those trees, and the maize or whatever crops you have are going to be growing at approximately the same temperature they did 50 years before.
Well, it's I see it's getting past 2:30. I'm certainly willing to stay if people want to, but I don't know if we should wrap up. And I think we can go back to
usually by this time we've had our workshop ended for us, and I'm just calling Adam now about why that's not. But in any case, we're actually well, our time is up, and I think people are leaving. So
John Minkle's here.
Adam, we're not being cut off. I just wonder whether
do you guys, I mean, I think at this point, oh, well.
I think we were sort of winding down.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think usually Adam would come in and say, it's officially over, but you're free to stay on and talk. I don't think he wants to end anything. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
Conference is officially over. You could join us back in the main room, or if you guys want to keep talking, either is totally fine. We won't close the meeting down.
Are there still folks in the main room right now?
There's a few back in the main room, but I think people are signing off.
Yeah.
Actually, John, why don't we go back to the main room, and anybody wants to follow in, we could widen the conversation, might widen, it might continue. People can stay, people not stay, but we'll be all back together.
How do you get to the main room from here?
He's going to take us there.
Well, just down on the bottom right, you can
Yeah.
click leave breakout room.
Leave breakout room.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Oh, there you go.
Thanks. See you later.
All right, on my way.